Hello everybody, this is the video for Module 4, Lesson 15. This is our first lesson where we're going to be multiplying decimal numbers. In particular, we're just multiplying, starting easy today, by one-digit whole numbers or by multiples of 10, so numbers that end in 0. All right, here we go. So today, you are going to see a whole number multiplied by a decimal number. So skip a line and write this. Now for adding and subtracting decimals, we use stacking. However, for this, we're going to write don't stack the decimals. Just kind of hover this little rule over here. When we multiply, we do not stack the decimals. So think about this. For standard algorithm, the way your parents and I learned how to do this, we should know when we multiply, we always put the number with the most digits on top. So the 2 9/10 on top, and the 4 is going to go on the bottom because it has less digits. And don't forget, when you multiply, that's because of regrouping, right? You need to carry sometimes. Now, this looks like we stacked it, but remember, we didn't stack the decimals. The 4 has a decimal point right here. If I were to add these two numbers up, the 4 would have to go under the 2, and we'd write 4.anx 0, right? But don't forget what multiplication is. Multiplication is repeated addition. I'm basically doing 2.9 plus 2.9 plus 2.9 plus 2.9. In that case, I would stack. And you could do that for this one because it's kind of easy. But we've learned standard algorithm for multiplication. And if you can do 29 times 4, you can do 29/10 times 4. So here's what we're going to do to make this easy. We're going to ignore the decimal point and erase it. So go ahead and erase the decimal point. But we don't want to forget that it was there. So I'm going to write the unit form of this. Instead of saying 2.9, I'm going to write 29/10 because that 9 is in the tenths place. So we could read this as 2 9/10 or 29/10. Like 29 dimes would be written as $2.90. So now with the decimal point there, not there, we can multiply these like any third grader's doing right now downstairs. So 9 times 4, don't forget 9 trick for that one, is 36. Now you can see why we needed that single digit number on the bottom, because we got to regroup up to here, a 3. And going way back to when we learned multiplication earlier this year, remember, when you have a regrouped number, you multiply first, then add it. Multiply first, then add. So 4 times 2 is 8. Then we add the 3, which is 11. Now, because we are taking tenths, like dimes, and doing 4 groups of them, our answer is going to tell us how many tenths we have now. And now all you have to do is put the decimal point where it goes. So if this is tenths, that means that this 6 needs to be in the tenths place. If you look at a place value chart, the tenths place is right here. You would have a decimal point right here, and then the ones, and then tens. So on our final answer, it is going to be 11 6/10, or 116 tenths. All right. Now we're going to do another one for today. I'm going to leave the rule up there. This is another one right from the homework. 6 13/100 will be our decimal number. And now we're going to multiply by a multiple of 10. So I'm going to use 20 for this one. Okay, so for this problem, same thing as the last one. Okay, we're not going to stack the decimals. There's a decimal point on the end of the 20. We want the number with the most digits on top, so this time it's the first one. But I'm going to take the decimal out. And put the 20 underneath it as if I'm doing double-digit multiplication. Now that the decimal's gone, since this ends in the hundredths, I'm going to write hundredths over here just to remind myself. And then I'm going to look at what my answer should be. So I'm going to write hundredths here. Now, you might have noticed something about this number right here. It has to do with our focus. We're multiplying by multiples of 10. If you remember the earlier lessons, when numbers end in zeros, sometimes that gives us a little indicator that there's an easier way to do it, sometimes mental math. And in this case, there is. Here's what I want you to do. You're probably not going to like me for making you do this, but you're going to take your eraser. You're going to erase the 20, and we're just going to look at the 2 on the 20. Going back to the question, I want you to think about the old thing we talked about when we have a number that ends in zeros with multiplication or division. You could think about like a hidden fact. 613 times 2, if we ignore the decimal, is the hidden fact. If we find that answer and then just put a 0 on the end, that's a way to avoid doing X's and O's in double-digit multiplication in a question like this. So, now that you have it set up like this, we just have to remember to add a 0 back onto the end of this when we are done. So now watch how much easier this is. 3 times 2 is 6. 1 times 2 is 2. 6 times 2 is 12. No need to regroup because we're done. And then squeeze in a 0 at the end. That part's going to be important. If you forget that 0, you're going to get it wrong because the question's not 6 and 1300ths times 2. It's 613 times 20. But again, why do we take that 0 off? Well, because if we did X's and O's, we'd just have a full row of zeros when we get down to the second row, or the first row, I mean, when we multiply. So it just saves us some extra writing. So now that we see our answer in unit form, we just need to plug it in a place value chart in our minds. If this is going to the hundredths place, that means that has to be the hundredths. That means this has to be the tenths, this has to be the decimal point, and this has to be the ones. So up top, I'm going to write 122 and 60 hundredths. And you could even take that 0 off and still get this correct because it's just outside of our range of digits and it's to the right, so it's not worth anything. Taking that off does not change the value. We're still 122.6 either way. This is just showing us that there's 0 hundredths. All of the questions are going to be like that today. So I want you to just focus when there's a 0 on the end of the number, take it off and put it back on at the end. And when you see a decimal, we're not stacking today. You just write the unit form and then put the decimal back in at the end. Okay? Otherwise, this is like third grade multiplication. So remember, start on the right and work your way over. Good luck.